All right, good morning. This is George, and for the next half hour, I will be reading from the July 2nd, 2026 issue of the River Rock Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. All right, let us go to something that's been in the headlines recently, the Volker property on the corner of Amherst and Elmwood. Headline: Planning Board approves proposal for Volker's property with one condition. And the article starts: After several years and a public hearing session kept open for 2 weeks, the Buffalo Planning Board on Monday evening approved the long-discussed proposal to build a total of 275 apartments on the site of the former Volker bowling alley at the corner of Amherst Street and Elmwood Avenue. The construction is not likely to begin for quite some time, which is too bad, and development will take place over 2 phases, the first of which will include a 5-story mixed-use building containing 230 apartments and 8,500 square feet of commercial space and 164 parking stalls. The second phase, to come later, will include 2 additional loft-style buildings to make up the additional 45 apartments. Boy, that is a pretty big project. All right, let me go. Prior to the board's vote, a number of residents and nearby business owners did raise some concerns about the kind of businesses that might fill in the commercial space in the first phase. During the previous meeting 2 weeks ago, it was stated by the developer that the space would be divided into 3 parcels for 3 businesses. Those speaking during Monday's public hearing urged SAA/EVI, I'm assuming that's the developer, to reconsider dividing the 8,500 square feet space into smaller storefronts to encourage small businesses to set up shop in the new development. Casimir Garrison, a nearby resident, said he's excited to see the vision for the now empty lot come to fruition and believes it has the opportunity to be a, quote, powerful project. I think there's one concern I have right now. It's a big block of space. If that were to be filled by one commercial renter, it's going to draw from a different population. He said smaller businesses tend to attract from a smaller area, which hopefully encourages bicycles and foot traffic. He said, if you look at Hurdle in South Elmwood, it's very good for small businesses and creates a nice atmosphere. If there was an opportunity to divide up that space to 800 to 1,500 square feet spaces that wrap around into Amherst Street, I think that would be advantageous to everyone, including the residents who live in the new apartments and people who live off-site. Close quote. Those are good points that Mr. Garrison makes. Other concerns raised included the safety of pedestrians, including students leaving McKinley High School and having to cross Elmwood Avenue to catch a bus home at what's already a busy intersection without any changes to traffic patterns or the addition of traffic calming measures. Resident Darius Melvin pointed out that Elmwood Avenue has 2 lanes, plus a turning lane at the intersection with Amherst Street, but Amherst Street itself is only 1 lane in both directions, leading to congestion on all sides of the intersection and traffic sometimes backing up to the Wegmans on Amherst and Bridgman Streets, which is true. I have experienced that myself, but it's livable. Parking remains a point of contention for people in the neighborhood. As one Marion Street resident said, there's very little parking on the street currently. I don't know if he was referring to Amherst Street or Elmwood. All right, so there's very little parking on the street currently, with hydrants taking up spaces in front of some homes. She was also concerned about the building blocking sunlight from houses on the north side of the street once both phases are completed. In response to previously stated concerns about the proposed building being rather large, the developer provided a graphic showing that the height of the new apartment complex, all right, now we got to go to page 5 here, bear with me. All right, we're getting there. Page 4. I'm scrolling up here. All right, here we go. We go to page 5, and on page 5 there's a diagram of the project, and it's quite impressive, quite large, but I guess that's progress. Anyway, so that the complex here is comparable in size to a handful of buildings along Amherst Street already, including McKinley High School, the Pierce Arrow Building on Great Arrow, and the new glass expansion at the AKG Art Museum. Updated designs also noted that the requirement of one shade producing tree for every 1,000 square feet of non-paved area on the perimeter of the property, in addition to one shade tree for each 30 feet of right-of-way frontage, will be surpassed. Let me start that again. That was a little confusing. Updated designs also noted that the requirement of one shade-producing tree for every 1,000 square feet of non-paved area on the perimeter of the property, in addition to one shade tree for each 30 feet of right-of-way frontage, will be surpassed, with the intended planting of at least 43 trees, compared to the 8 that are required. So that's a good thing. There's going to be a lot of trees. In one phase alone, with trees planted along Marion and Amherst Street and Elmwood Avenue, and at least one tree for every 20 parking spaces in the proposed lots. Well, that sounds good. Connor Kenny, who is the regional director and partner with the firm, SAA/EVI, did agree to the one condition placed on the proposal before the board voted to approve it. And the condition was this: a 5-foot-high privacy fence will be included along the edge of the property where it abuts a neighboring house. Since 2011, Mr. Kenny's property has invested some $430 million in Buffalo, creating 1,300 apartment units across a dozen developments, he said at the beginning of the meeting. He said, "We are super committed to Buffalo. We've done a lot of work here, and we're really excited about this project." I don't blame him. It's a pretty exciting project. He added that he's open to further consideration of how the retail space along the first floor of the building will be divided in the future, including the possibility of flexible spaces that could be adjusted based on the needs of a business tenant. Kenny has previously stated that initial groundwork could begin on the property as early as 2027, pending the sale of the lot to his company. Construction for the first phase would take up to 24 months to complete. So that's interesting. Okay. All right, let me go back to page 1. All right. A companion article on page 1. Headline: Options are presented for possible Grant Street, Amherst Street Historic District. Around 13 years ago, some preliminary work was done to consider whether Around 13 years ago, some preliminary work was done to consider whether a historic district covering Grant and Amherst Street buildings and homes should be established. Is it time to reconsider pursuing such a distinction? That is the question at hand, as both the Grant Amherst Business Association and the Black Rock Historical Society weigh the possibility of seeking grant funding to work on an application to secure one of 3 historic designations. Chris Hawley, a city planner with the city's Planning and Zoning Board, introduced by North District Council member Joe Golombek as the father of the, let me start again. So Chris Hawley was introduced by Councilman Joe Golombek as the father of the city's Green Code. Oh yeah, I remember that. It was a couple of years ago. The father of the city's Green Code for restoration, renovation, redevelopment, and new builds, and he walked people through the options during an hour-long meeting on Monday evening. He stressed a handful of times that the meeting was more of an information session to provide some basic information on what each historic district type offers in terms of both benefits and possible hurdles, and start to discuss whether this is something that should be attempted. Hawley said, "My role tonight is not to sell you on the idea. It's not to sell you against the idea. My job here is just to give you the information you need to make a decision as a community. I like historical preservation," said Hawley. "I think a lot of folks take advantage of historic preservation in meaningful ways to promote economic development and tourism and community identity. But my job tonight is not to sell you on anything, but rather to get the conversation started and to see whether the work begun 13 years ago, which is stalled over a lack of consensus, is worth resuming. Communities consider historic districts." All right, got to go to page 6 here. Bear with me. They consider historic districts in terms of the neighborhood history and architecture, in addition to encouraging reinvestment in their neighborhood and creating a point of pride about where they live. Historic districts, depending on what type is chosen, offer benefits usually in the form of tax credits and grants. All right, well, this might be a little tedious. I'll keep going. But when I sense that we're bogging down in the weeds here, so to speak, I will move to another area of interest. So there are 3 types of districts. There's a local historic district, which they are designated only by the city and are held to the standards established by the city's preservation ordinance. This provides the strongest levels of protection, as all demolition and exterior alterations of buildings included in the district, along with any new construction, would have to be reviewed and approved by the city in order to make sure they're in keeping with the district's historic character and attributes. It does not create any federal or state eligibility for tax credits on rehabilitation work. The second type of district is called Certified Local Historic Districts, as recognized by the Federal Secretary of the Interior and the National Park Service as substantially meeting the requirements of the National Register, and as a result, quote, contributing properties, close quote, are eligible for historic tax credits. Any renovations or substantial changes or work on a contributing party would need certification and project approval from the National Parks Service or the State Historical Preservation Office. Owner-occupied homes in a certified local historic district qualify for state-level historic homeowner tax credits, which is interesting. So it's not just something that can benefit commercial property owners, but also private owner-occupied homes, and that's certified local historic districts. Okay, the third and final category is National Register, capital letters, historic districts that are formally recognized at the federal level and listed in the National Register of Historic Places after review by the National Park Service and State Historic Preservation Office, and provides federal and state tax credit opportunities for contributing properties, both businesses and owner-occupied homes. So in terms of weighing the options here, If the if the Grant Amherst Business Association and BlackRock Historic Society decide to pursue any kind of distinction, it would likely try to secure a grant to hire a consultant to do some of the heavy lifting, like identifying the boundaries of the proposed district, any significant and contributing structures therein, and to start crafting a justification for the district using the work done in 2013, 13 years ago, as a starting point. So, said Hawley, that's really the question for you as a community. Is the primary goal, if you're interested in historic district, is the primary goal protection from demolition and incompatible changes? If so, local historic district designation is the key tool, and that local district can be certified to offer the additional tax incentives. Or, says Hawley, he asks, is the primary goal tax credit access before and without full National Register listing, in which case National Park Service certification of a local district is the way to go. Okay. All you wanted to know and then some from Mr. Hawley relative to historic district designations. All right, let's continue. Relative to the heat wave that Buffalo's been experiencing this summer, the city of Buffalo is encouraging residents to take precautions as high temperatures and dangerous heat, I should say, continue across western New York by utilizing the city's cooling centers and staying hydrated. Quote, Mayor Ryan says, quote, with extreme heat expected this week, we're asking residents to take the necessary precautions to protect themselves and their families. If you don't have access to air conditioning, please visit one of our cooling centers, drink plenty of water, avoid prolonged time outdoors during the hottest parts of the day, and check in on older neighbors and loved ones. Lawrence Pernick, Jr., Executive Director of the Northwest Buffalo Community Center at 155 Lawn Avenue, says they are a cooling center open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And that's, again, the Northwest Buffalo Community Center. No, yes, that's correct. This Friday, they are closed, however, due to the 4th of July holiday. The same hours and days are in effect for the North Buffalo Community Center, which is located at 203 Saunders Road. And that's the Northwest Buffalo Community Center. Okay, so we got Northwest Buffalo. Okay, so there's the Northwest Buffalo Community Center and there's the North Buffalo Community Center. So there's two places that are available for people to take precautions at these cooling centers. That's what they're called, a cooling center. Okay, that's the end of that article. All right, let's move on to the next page. A few thoughts for America 250. This is a perspective piece offered by a writer by the name of Martin Ederer. As the United States celebrates its 250th anniversary as an independent nation, perhaps a few historical observations are appropriate. Number one, there was a long and complicated history of people in our part of the world before the Europeans landed here. Some, especially in Central and South America, built advanced civilizations. All of them, everywhere, had their own political organization and complex diplomacy. Even after the Europeans landed, the indigenous peoples engaged in complex diplomacy with the new arrivals and took sides based on their own self-interest. It is something of a disservice to portray our indigenous peoples only as victims, even if for most of them that was the end result. As well, think of how much know-how we all missed out on because of dismissive European attitudes toward peoples who knew this part of the world long before we got here. Before Columbus, there were the Vikings in the 900s Nordic sagas give us some glimpses into Viking relationships with the people they encountered in the Canadian Maritimes and the northern Atlantic coast of what is now the United States. Already, they weren't getting along. Number 3, although Christopher Columbus got a national holiday in the U.S., he never landed in any territory that is part of the United States. He got his holiday for a few other reasons. First, quote, his discovery of America, close quote, was the one that stuck and initiated ongoing and intensive European activity in and immigration to the New World. In short, what he did, whether you love him or hate him, and there is a case to be made for both, he fundamentally transformed the world forever. Second, he got a national holiday in the U.S. because the Italian immigrants, who were dismissed as inferior and in some places faced lynching, for not being white enough, I never knew that, wanted to remind white Anglo-Saxon Protestants that they were only here, that the Protestants were only here and in charge because an Italian had landed here first. That's interesting. Number 4, apropos to point 3 above, some thoughts on dates and how we use them. We consider July 4th, 1776, the birthday of the U.S. This was the official rollout date of the Declaration of Independence. Date geeks are well aware, however, that by July 4th, 1776, the American Revolution had been raging for more than a year. Congress had already declared the 13 colonies free of British rule on July 2nd, 1776. Well, that's a very precise, seemingly unnecessary differentiation. However, since the U.S. was a creation of British colonists, the other important, quote, birthday, close quote, for the U.S. is May 4th, 1607. The establishment of Jamestown marked the first successful permanent British colonial venture in North America. The takeaway there is a 169-year prehistory to our 250th anniversary this year. So that's interesting. So while we're celebrating, the 250th anniversary, 169 years before that, people were here from the United Kingdom in North America trying to, settle the area here. If we take the Columbus 1492 discovery date into account, there is a 284-year prehistory. That comes with a corollary that the first permanent European settlements in what is now the United States were Spanish. For example, in St. Augustine, Florida, which was 1585, and in, let's say, west of the Mississippi in Santa Fe in New Mexico, that came in 1610. Now, point number 5, if you have never read the entire Declaration of Independence, you should. I never have. I don't think many people have. The part that we like to quote that expresses high political ideals only constitutes the first 8 or 9 lines. The rest is a list of grievances against King George III of Great Britain. One of my colleagues described it as, quote, the best breakup letter ever. That's cute, close quote. What becomes clear is that British subjects in the colonies... Let me start again. What becomes clear is that British subjects in the colonies held that they should not have been treated as, quote, colonials, close quote. They expected the same rights that Englishmen back home in Great Britain enjoyed, especially some consultation if the Crown was demanding payment of taxes from them, which is a fundamental right already expressed in some way in the Magna Carta in Great Britain in 1215. Wow, interesting. The other fun factoid is that for many Brits, George III came to be viewed as a welcome change from his haughty predecessors. That's news to me. The American view is obviously very different. Isn't it funny how politics never really changes? Point number 6, it is sometimes important to remind ourselves that as important as a baseline national narrative is, there are numerous side stories and smaller yet interesting stories hiding out behind the bigger narrative that we really all should master only as a starting point. Well, I mean, yes, but I mean, do we all have the time to do that? In the angry either-or debates that often dominate political invective about teaching American history, a practical and honest approach should dominate. There's room for all the stories, but not always the time to tell them all. That's when some sensible decisions become important. Trying to get a sense as to whether this article goes on pretty far, and I think I'm going to stop. It's an interesting article. I don't mean to diminish its importance and interest level, but I just want to move on to see if there's anything else. Here's kind of a bad news type of article. Erie County District Attorney Michael Cain announced that Samuel Bear, 45 years of age, of West Seneca, was sentenced July 1, receiving an indeterminate sentence of 2 to 6 years in prison. And his driver's license was revoked for 6 months. On September 25th, 2024, at about 10:56 p.m., the victim fell onto the road while crossing at an intersection near Elmwood Avenue between Hurdle and Hinman Avenue in North Buffalo. A Good Samaritan, who was stopped at the red light in the northbound lane, exited his vehicle to try to help the victim and stop oncoming traffic. The defendant was driving his pickup truck south on Elmwood Avenue when he drove through the green light and hit the victim in the roadway. After the impact, the defendant veered into the northbound lane and onto a grass-covered lot before he continued to drive south on Elmwood Avenue. The defendant left the scene of an incident resulting in death without notifying the police. The victim, 59-year-old Joseph Donmessy, was taken by ambulance to ECMC, where he was pronounced deceased. And that is a sad story. I guess that's what we live with here. All right, a few more articles of interest here. Okay, there's another article about the heat ahead for the holiday weekend and the cooling centers. I guess I've... All right. Here's an article about July 4th cookout baskets. The article starts, the headline, July 4th cookout basket costs are roughly the same share of a median weekly paycheck, 0.6%, as it did in 2016, 10 years ago. Interesting. All right, ahead of America's 250th Independence Day, Oxylab's research turned a decade of publicly available data into a picture of barbecue affordability, tracking inflation-adjusted prices on every major ingredient from 2016 to 2026. Everyone says barbecue items are more expensive, but the data shows that it takes the same bite out of an average American's paycheck as a decade ago. Key findings include beef is up 32%, cheese, tomatoes down 17%. The result, your burger costs about 11% more than in 2016. The hot dog basket is the same in real terms as it was in 2016, 0% change. Soft drink prices have risen 30% in real terms since 2016, with costs peaking in early 2024. At 0.6% of a median weekly paycheck, a single-person barbecue basket costs the same as a decade ago, though this is one of the most expensive years of the period.
Good morning. Welcome to another broadcast day in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, a private not-for-profit